Hey everybody, this is Dan Keldsen with Next Feature Today. Today's interview is with Michael Franklin. He is really deep into speechwriting and ghostwriting. He has an organization called Speechwriters of Color that's focused on releveling the playing field for who can participate and is known as participating in speechwriting. And by the way, it's about more than political speechwriting, which is maybe obvious in hindsight, but at least for me, I tend to think of speechwriters are in the profession of being involved in politics in a useful way and not in a way that's trying to just batter other people into certain ways of thinking or to reinforce certain fears in a lot of cases. And we talk a lot about what is it that goes with the name of speechwriting, and is speechwriting what it should be called? How is it made more accessible? How can you reframe how you're known as or getting known as a speechwriter, or some label applied to speechwriting like executive communicator tends to be a fairly well-paid version of speechwriting. It just elevates the conversation, or as a collaborator, or there's lots of different terminology. I don't want to give it away too much, but we talk a lot about speechwriting. We also talk a lot about ghostwriting, similar issue, and it would seem that they're a lot more overlapped than they actually are, as it turns out. And yet, all forms of communication, which we could all stand to get better at, I believe. So without battering us a little bit, let's go find out more from Michael. Hey, so Michael, it is so very good to get a chance to talk to you on camera with record head instead of a couple of weeks ago. It seems like several weeks ago, actually, when we first met virtually, but welcome to Next Feature Today.
Thank you for having me. And absolutely, I'm always down to have conversations on and offline.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I like about the people that typically I find, or sometimes are referred to me, that are usually pretty approachable people that are willing to share their knowledge. And given that the premise of Next Feature Today is that people should be purposely creating their next feature starting right now, then that's the point. Find people that will help support you in your growth, and that will help you create whatever that next feature is. So I think for today, your primary topics, speechwriting and ghostwriting, and I think there's overlap between the two clearly, and they're also radically different in a lot of ways too. So whether people are on camera, they're writing a speech for themselves, or if they are a speechwriter on behalf of somebody else, which is what I normally think of when I think of speechwriting, or a writer of any kind trying to figure out how do you get known as a ghostwriter if you're supposed to never be seen? little quirk there that might be troublesome. I found you by way of Josh Burnoff, who I know from the technical analyst world when he was at Forrester, and I was early in my career. And he mentioned that he met you at a ghostwriting conference recently. Was that right?
Yeah, it was Gathering of the Ghost, which was one of the first ghostwriting exclusive conferences to ever be hosted. And it was hosted by Gotham Ghostwriters and the American Society for Journalists and Authors back in January.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was a great time.
So what was, I could imagine what might be talked about there, but what was actually talked about there?
A lot of the different pieces, from a mix of the business of ghostwriting and being able to discuss ways in which you're able to bring on and onboard new clients, and some conversations around pay transparency, but also a bit just about being in community with each other and how we can ensure the community is a bit more cohesive. And for me, it was very interesting just because I've gone to the Professional Speechwriters Association World Conference multiple times and have spoken at that one and everything. But at this conference, I expected like a lot of overlap between the two, but there ended up not being much overlap at all. And it was a really new community of coming across a lot of cool folks. And it was really informative and really shined a spotlight for me of, hey, there's a lot of speechwriters who are already really good writers, who they have an opportunity and a chance to transfer those skills into being ghostwriters as well. And really hoping to be one of the bridges that can bring both of those together in the near future.
So what did you expect to get covered there versus what actually, as you already explained a little bit about what did, but what were you expecting that sounds like successfully blew your mind?
I expected there to be like a lot of the fundamentals about the business and kind of understanding the state of the industry and all. And I was asked to speak at the town hall session to discuss the lack of diversity within ghostwriting and to share some of the work that I've done in the speechwriting profession to help it become more representative of the audiences that folks are trying to reach. And so there was a lot of fundamental knowledge that I expected that I gained throughout the conference, but I think one of the more interesting pieces was just simply that folks don't have a lot of community with each other. Being able to see that there's so many different paths for ghostwriting, and also similar to speechwriting, there's an identity crisis with what they should call themselves. In speechwriting, there's an identity crisis between calling ourselves speechwriters or executive communications professionals or just writers. And with ghostwriting, it's similar. If they want to be ghostwriters, if they want to be collaborators, if they want to be architects, whatever it may be. And so it's the similar issue where it's just like when the people in the profession don't understand what to call themselves, then it's really tough for it to be visible for other folks to even learn about it or get involved in the work too.
So, I mean, I hinted at it already. So the irony of ghostwriting is that you're not named most often. Sometimes you're a secondary author or something, and you might get second tier billing on a book cover or something, right? But written by, with, fill in the blank. How do you get known as a ghostwriter if you're essentially invisible?
So it's interesting because it's like any business, and like any service provider where you may have your brand where you're able to share. I've written or have 20 bylines with different authors, and I've had a byline in support of like X number of New York Times bestsellers or Amazon bestsellers. It is something I see with a lot of ghostwriters branding. Part of the negotiation process that it seems to be is that ghostwriters will get some sort of publicity clause, whether if it's getting to explicitly say the author and book for like marketing materials on their website, or whether if it's something where you can use this in a portfolio behind the scenes as you're discussing new business. And that's similar to speechwriting, where even on my own site, where I'll have some work samples in terms of work I've done, I have a note where it's like for more specific speechwriting or ghostwriting samples, then you can email directly and like we can have a discussion about those. Because some folks, they don't want to have that like public recognition of having worked with a collaborator or ghostwriter, but others we're starting to see more frequently too are starting to have ghostwriters kind of rise to the occasion and speechwriters come to the forefront a bit more. Because as you've mentioned in the past, there was a lot of, hey, you need to stay in the shadows. Like, you don't need any acknowledgement. We need people to believe that they did this all by themselves, But now it's not really like that, where folks are now willing to say, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I worked with this really great person who helped get my thoughts together and help develop like the final product.
So words matter. And I'm sorry, I forget, you have two organizations, Speechwriters of Color and the other one, which I'm blanking out. I'm sorry.
Words normalize behavior.
There you go. Okay. And as any kind of writer, you care about words, and sometimes there's subtle differences in words that you might use, or very radically different. Like, do you need a $10 word, or do you need a 5-cent word, or do you need to speak in a certain language, essentially, given the audience that you wouldn't normally use certain words with, right? So is the discussion about what do you call yourself, is that tied to, like, for me, and I think a lot of people that I've talked to, I've done freelance writing and I've done ghostwriting. Ghostwriting pays better. Freelance writing, it feels like you could go on Fiverr or Upwork or any of a number of platforms and get an article written for $1, right? Which is not exciting. Is that about pay the way that people are talking about their profession, or whether it's ghostwriting or things like that, or speechwriting, or is it just more of a matter of sort of elevating it as more of a partnership or a equal sort of status with whoever you're writing for?
I think it's a mix of both, honestly. Like, for a lot of people, being able to utilize that specific terminology like speechwriter or ghostwriter isn't something that's super well known, like even in communications programs. Like, I was a communications major in college, but in terms of potential career paths, like speechwriter or ghostwriter didn't come up. And I always think of, there's a speechwriter, Teresa Zumwalt, who she, from the beginning of starting her business, she started her business back in the 90s, but she always said, she's like, I will never call myself a freelance writer because nothing about my work is free. And I think of that often because she would always use terminology like contract writer or speechwriter in discussing and sharing her work. But I think when it comes to the branding particularly, like people, since folks don't know speechwriter or ghostwriter as a particular way to brand themselves, despite doing the work, then it ends up undercutting the possibility of what can be made. Like in the past, the Professional Speechwriters Association has released membership surveys where they're sharing how speechwriting is one of the highest paid concentrations of public relations and communications. And as I've started Speechwriters of Color and have grown the membership and met with so many different people, one of the big things has been I meet folks who don't have the title speechwriter or executive communications manager, but they've been doing the work for years. And they're just like, oh, wow, I guess I am a speechwriter. Like, it's interesting that you frame it that way, but I always run through some pretty typical basic questions where I'm like, one, have you written some talking points for like someone else or a principal? Have you ever ghostwritten like an op-ed for them? Have you written their remarks? Congratulations. If you've done those, then you can claim yourself as a speechwriter. And like you can add that into the details or description when you're describing the work you've done. And just based off of that keyword, like when you think of how recruiting agencies are reaching out and looking for folks on LinkedIn, like they're looking for that keyword and that key terminology. But particularly because there's a lack of that visibility in terms of people of color, like using that to describe the work they're doing, recruiters are not finding folks of color who are incredibly qualified to do speechwriting jobs or reaching out for speechwriting roles. And so that visibility and awareness is something that's super important and has been a top priority, not only for like students and aspiring speechwriters, but also for those current professionals who have been doing the work, but they may have had like a catch-all title of communications coordinator or communications specialist, yet they're missing out on the opportunity to raise that price and also get other opportunities, especially if they really like the work of speechwriting and ghostwriting that they've done too.
Do you think it's easier to get, like if you're already established as as a speechwriter, is it easier to move into ghostwriting versus if you're known as a ghostwriter and move into speechwriting? Because I mean, there's definitely overlap, but I think there's different specialties that you kind of need to get into the right mindset, essentially.
Yeah. And so that's what I'm really working on right now with a lot of folks, because after the conference, like you're have the same thought as you in terms of there should be overlap, right? But there's just it's a very small overlap right now. But I'm operating off of the thesis that yes, speechwriters know how to work with an individual. They know how to work with a principal. They know how to develop a story, and they're strong writers. While they can do that in any range of speeches, like think about how you have speechwriters who may write for Congress people who have the magic minute, where it's just a minute of floor remarks, versus folks who are writing keynote addresses that can be like 14, 15 minutes, or even speechwriters who are writing like stakeholder meetings and like investment meetings where it ends up being like an hour plus long remarks. Like, granted, none of those are as long as a book, but they have the technical skill and the technical tools to become effective ghostwriters. It's just a matter of learning those fundamentals of, okay, you need to outline a table of contents. You need to understand the publishing industry. You need to understand how to write book proposals. And being able to build those fundamentals, speechwriters seem to have like a very tangible path to becoming ghostwriters. And, you know, there's some speechwriters who are like, you know what, I'm tired of doing speechwriting. And rather, I love to write, you know, like 3 books a year and make 6 figures and call it a day and be done with that. And I think similarly with ghostwriters too, it seems like a transition that would make sense. And I've heard from some ghostwriters themselves where they're like, you know, I'm tired of having to write like 40,000 words. I'd much rather do like a 14-minute keynote and like just learning the framework of that and making pretty good money and just doing a number of those a year too.
For people who didn't necessarily study journalism or, you know, communications in college, what are some of the things that are not obvious about, let's talk about speechwriting. What are some of the things that you found doing speechwriting that you hadn't anticipated at all, and whether it's finding clients or how to put together a speech the most quickly, you know, most efficiently, or getting into somebody's head to find their voice and then channel it?
Oh yeah, so there's like a few things. So for my background in college, I was a legal communications major at Howard University, where the concentration chair of the major would always say, like, you know how hospitals have a press secretary and a general counsel. Why hire both when you can hire a legal communications major? Because we're able to explain the law in a simple way, in a way that the general public is able to understand. However, throughout that concentration in that major, while there were, of course, many technical communications courses and even like technical writing courses around pre-law that like sharpened my technical writing skills, I would say that one of the pieces that I wish I would have had was taking like an intro to journalism class, because a big part of speech writing is knowing how to interview and draw answers out from the principle that you're working with. And so that's something that I've fundamentally been able to pick up in figuring out ways in which I want to ask questions and understand the goals and the feelings and the passions of principles that I work with. But it's really something where it's like, wow, that practice of interviewing, like a lot of folks, you know, we see speech writing and ghostwriting as a very kind of solitary type work. But something that I'm really big on saying in branding is that speechwriters are strategists at their core. Like, you cannot just solely be a scribe, but you have to be a strategist. And as a strategist, you have to be able to dictate and articulate the questions that will be able to produce the best story. You have to understand that underlying story structure. So even another piece is, I think there would be a lot of value in like taking creative storytelling courses too, instead of like your more traditional communications courses, because knowing how a good story has your exposition and your rising action and your climax and your falling action and conclusion, you know, like those are key if you want to tell a good story, especially through a good speech, because the best speeches have all of that momentum and being able to connect and share with folks. And so looking at those types of topics, I think, are super important. And like, they're not your traditional communications or speech writing courses, but you're able to learn like a lot of key transferable skills that are meaningful to be an effective speechwriter and partner or ghostwriter or collaborator with the principal.
So I like to pull from all sorts of different roles and skills and industries, because I think that then I can find the best of something that maybe came out of left field from one industry, but is totally normal and accepted and might have been in use for 20 or 30 years, right? If we get back to speech writing, then part of it is, so you have to have a position, whether you're writing for yourself or you're writing on behalf of somebody else. I'm assuming we're talking about writing for somebody else. And some of the things like in politics, and I hope to God I'm never a political writer, but George Lakoff, pretty famous guy. Don't think of an elephant, which of course instantly everybody thinks of an elephant. Primarily talks about framing, and he's a progressive Democrat, and how do progressive Democrats get things wrong when they're trying to communicate? And the way the hint is, you don't just blurt facts at people. If you want to convince them of something, if they are already convinced, the fact might help them reinforce it, but not so much if they're sort of immune to the facts. And then the guy that a lot of us love to hate, Dr. Frank Luntz, words that work. He's sort of he's the brains behind the Republican Party, and he's all about testing specific language to see how does it inflame essentially certain crowds or get them fired up, and is it mute things down, which you don't typically want when you're trying to get things going. Is there anybody? Are there like some standard, like maybe not traditional resources, but new resources? Like you talked about the change of debates and sharing information. What are sort of new 21st century, or we're 24 years into the 21st century, so 2020 plus era resources, books, videos, people, organizations that our audience should know if they're interested in sort of jumping straight to the head, being sort of cutting edge for speech writing?
Yes, so there are a few tools. So first, I think one is the idea of asset-based framing. That's from Trabion Shorters, where it's the idea of like framing how you talk about issues, making sure that you're putting people first in those conversations rather than making people kind of seem like an afterthought as you're describing folks. Another piece that I thought has been very effective is the Guide to Messaging Our Freedoms. and it was created by an org called We Make the Future in ASO Communications, where it's the idea that there's a way in which you can utilize what's called the race class narrative in order to frame arguments that are more well received with folks. And like they utilized a mix of like psychology, message testing, you name it, and to the point where they have it down to a science and an architecture for how to utilize it, essentially. And so, for an example, with the race class narrative, it's like you will always want to open with shared values that name and or show race. Then you want to name a villain or their motivations and how they're using racism or scapegoating to divide and distract us while everyone is getting harmed. Then you want to uplift victories of like everyday collective actions that are solving problems. Then describe a vision for what will change that includes everyone coming together to achieve it, and then inserting a specific call to action based on whatever you're writing about or writing for. And so like those are two tools in terms of just the simple framing and structure that I think all speechwriters should be working with their leaders to incorporate and implement. Because if you're a speechwriter, you should be a strategist, and you should be working with leaders to help them be the most effective messengers and most effective change agents towards whatever goal they want to have. So for some folks, it may be strictly business goals. For others, it may be social justice goals. But as a speechwriter, you need to understand their formal strategic goals. You should help them with shaping them or offering recommendations. And then you have to figure out how you can tell the story behind those goals. Outside of those like framing resources, I always recommend simply immersing yourself in speeches and just reading speeches. And so I always recommend Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, which is a compilation of essays and speeches that she wrote throughout her life. And it's just a great example of seeing like effective communications, great speeches and all. Another is also the Speaking While Female speech bank from Dana Rubin, where it's a collection of speeches from women throughout history. And it's just, again, when you immerse yourself in speeches, then you're able to really take good inspiration of saying things that were effective, things that might not have been effective. And also being able to utilize like the history to cite is always important. Like I'm a big person that I love to incorporate either stories from history or quotes and using it as a framing mechanism for remarks that I'm drafting for someone, or being able to find an example similarly based to the moment as well.
So we talked a little bit about this up front. Your organization, Speechwriters of Color. How's that been around, and how's the membership going? What's the sense of scale that you have, and what are you shooting for?
Oh yeah, so Speechwriters of Color was launched in 2020 by myself and Mentaro Oba. Because we saw that there was just a dearth of representation in speechwriter, to the point where if you would Google like speechwriter, like and looked at the Google images, like mostly just white pictures, white men would show up particularly for speechwriter. And so we were just like, we need to create an institution that can, one, bring folks together, and two, an institution that can advocate on behalf of folks. To share with folks that, hey, speechwriters of color exist and are out here. So like you can't have the excuse of we don't know where to find them anymore. And so since we've started the organization, we now have over 500 members of color within our organization. We also have over 100 allies in our organization as well, who are partners and supporters and amplifiers of the work. We've hosted a variety of master classes. We've had a reception. We've partnered with different conferences and trainings to give access to our members as well to sharpen and further their skills and development. We share out an opportunity list newsletter with our membership that has a 78% open rate that we're very proud of and able to share with folks like the work we're doing. We've had the privilege of being able to partner with the Biden-Harris administration as well, and placing folks within the administration in various speechwriting and communications roles. We've helped place speechwriters across the country, honestly, from nonprofits to corporations. And we have members in our network who write ranging from businesses locally to international businesses to folks who are writing for their local city council people, or folks who are speechwriters for mayors and localized nonprofits. And so we've done this building and we've proven ourselves like, hey, we've been able to bring folks together. We're a resource. There are tons of speechwriters of color out there who are capable, competent, and can do the work. And now what we're working on is first scaling up a fellowship program to really formalize like the training and pathway and tutelage that can help folks get into speech writing. Because the tale as old as time within speech writing is, oh, I just fell into it. And a lot of times it came from, I fell into it from an unpaid internship and they asked me to write for something and then they liked it. And here I am now writing for some of the most powerful people in the world. And so we're trying to like help with those fundamentals of, hey, you want to get it first, raising the awareness and visibility of speech writing, where it's like, cool, like this is a possibility, this is an opportunity. Let's get kids interested in wanting to do this. Particularly for me, I'm like, let's get speech and debate kids interested in speech writing, because this is the most transferable way to use those skills that you've been building up all these years in school, and now you can make it a career. Secondly, after building like that foundation, it's being able to look at opportunities for folks to get that tangible writing experience and working with the principal and seeing what it's like and really being able to go and do the work. And so we're finalizing the curriculum for that and really hoping to have some sort of launch for this program before the end of this year. It'll likely be fully virtual to start, and the cohort will be fairly small, but it's something we're really excited about. We're also looking toward hosting our first Speechwriters of Color conference this year in person, where we'll have just a one-day summit of information about some of the different skills and conversations that are key right now in speech writing, and bringing some of the most prominent figures in speech writing as well. And so that's something we're super excited about. And also just continuing to grow our membership. Like, we are very lucky and blessed to have like an international membership across, I think, every continent now, which is, again, wild to think about, but we're excited to continue just growing that representation too, and being able to build our international membership and learning about the role of speechwriters in other places too, and how they work with principals and how like they got into the work, and like if there are any opportunities or processes to like streamline and curate that process so it's most effective for folks to have the opportunity. I'll definitely say like folks can visit speechwritersofcolor.com to learn about our work. We're always interested in like not only adding additional members, but we're always interested also in folks who are interested in donating to the work, because we are a fiscally sponsored 501c3 as well. And so it wasn't until last year that we started like actually taking donations and having the infrastructure to scale and build the programs. We were just doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, honestly, because we understand the meaning and impact of this work. And now we just want to fine tune it even more, so we're really able to help folks get involved in this even more. Because speech writing is a field that has the opportunity to really change the arc of the world. And like, there's a role for speechwriters in every industry, and a role for folks who want to be change makers to work alongside leaders to drive positive impacts for everything we're witnessing in society.
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's a lot in there. It's a sort of having mission is a good thing. It helps you aim towards something that matters, and it sounds like along the way you're matter on a day-by-day basis. That's we should probably we should circle back on another interview at some point and talk some more about that, and about building how do you build a nonprofit and a 501c3, and why take that approach versus other approaches? Because I think there's people in the corporate world not so happy and want to go into something that has sort of more meaning, but how do you do that, and how do you make sure that it has the funding that it can support you? One of my final questions I like to ask is, the goal of the next feature today is to help people start today to purposely create the next feature. So if there was one thing that anybody listening to us right now was going to do today that would help them purposely create the next feature, what would you suggest?
I would suggest that they reach out to Speechwriters of Color and our team. And like, there's so many opportunities to take the leap. And within this field, like, I constantly tell people, everybody and their mama has a speechwriter. Like, whether they're called a speechwriter or not, they have some sort of thought partner that's helping draft their remarks, curate their thoughts, developing questions, whatever it may be. And so reach out and like we can help you brainstorm, strategize if you're wanting to get in. Like I always am telling folks like, hey, think about the issues that you care about. Then pair that with like local organizations or leaders that are doing that work. Sometimes early on, you may have to volunteer your time or take rates that are less than ideally what you want to pay for. But there's a chance that you can write remarks or write on behalf of folks that are doing the work. Like we have a college student in our network actually who is currently working with the mayor of his city. And he's actually helping like develop the state of the state or state of the city address for them and everything. And he's like, it just came from reaching out and being able to participate like based off of some of that counsel and advice. And so we're just constantly asking for folks to try and get involved because the worst folks can tell you is no at the end of the day, or they just won't give you a response. But there's so many opportunities and so many folks who they might not be familiar with speech writing, or they may think that, oh, I thought everyone was just writing and doing that themselves, but I could get help with that. Yeah, that sounds really cool, actually. I'd love that. And it's like it can range from like the political type things. It can range from the business and corporate type engagements. It can even be like award show scripts and speeches or gala like scripts and speeches, you know. But there are just many ways that folks can get involved. And so if you want to become a speechwriter or a thought partner or executive communications professional or a collaborator or ghostwriter, whatever you want to call it, like the step you can take today for your future is reaching out to Speechwriters of Color.
Awesome. And you're on LinkedIn, and it's mfranklin628 is the LinkedIn. Okay.
Yep, and that's
great.
My handle across all social media platforms, so Instagram, Twitter. Like you can find me that same way.
Fantastic. Well, so I thank you so much for joining today. I'm so glad that Josh happened to mention you in his newsletter, and we got connected. And who knows where it will go from here. But if there's anybody that you recommend that I have on the show that further my mission and our joint missions, that would be fantastic. But in the meantime, so happy to be able to spotlight what you're working on and learn a whole bunch that I didn't know about speechwriting.
All right. No, thank you so much for having me, and hopefully can't wait to come back and send some good folks your way too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael.